This is a 2006 Nissan Xterra that a customer bought a couple years ago for around $3,000. Now, if you've been watching me any period of time, you know I'm not a big Nissan fan, but back in 06, they were still making some decent vehicles, especially these SUVs. This particular one's the Xterra. The Pathfinders are pretty much the same exact vehicle. The woman who bought this vehicle, she's loved it. $3,000, still runs really well. She likes the fact she can move stuff with it, furniture, whatever. This baby's got a lot of space, high enough in the air. It's got good clearance, going through some water and stuff. And under the hood, well, the hood rod's missing, so I gotta replace that. My handy dandy PCV pipe, there, won't fall down now. Got a big old 4-liter V6. Very dependable Nissan engine. Yeah, it's a timing chain, not one of those timing belt ones. This has a timing chain in it. Nissan over the years has been kind of weird. Some of their V6 engines still had rubber timing belts, some went to chains. This has a chain. If you're looking for one, don't buy one with a belt, buy one with a chain. They're better motors, less maintenance, they work perfectly fine. This one got 207,995 miles. Starts right up. The AC's still blowing freezing cold. And sure, it's got a warning light for the tire pressure monitoring system. Those are broken. The seatbelt light's on, but the seatbelt works, so who cares? It also has the traction control system not working right. Part of that's because of those sensors, but they get old. That traction control stuff never worked that good anyway. You just ignore it. It goes back to non-traction control normal driving when they brake. And when you look at the overall setup, seats are real comfy, old, lots of mileage, still not torn through. You can see the back is absolutely ginormous. You could have a hockey game in the back seat there. This thing is huge. Now, when you combine the huge size and weight with the 210 horsepower V6, yeah, they're gas hogs. There's no arguing that. You don't buy a vehicle like this to get good gas mileage. This one gets about 14 miles a gallon in town and about 18 miles a gallon on a highway. They're pretty much gas hogs. But you want a vehicle like that? That's what you're going to get. It's square, it's up in the air, it's heavy, and it's got a powerful engine. Now, this particular one is classic rear-wheel drive. It's not the all-wheel drive version. So it has a 5-speed automatic transmission. And you know, I'm always talking about Nissans and Jatcos and bad transmissions. This transmission isn't bad because it's not a front-wheel drive transmission. Rear-wheel drive, 5-speed automatic. This thing's got over 200,000 miles, still shifts like a dream. And their trucks, they were putting good transmissions in the rear-wheel drive ones. I've had scores of customers over the last 30 years buy Xterras or Pathfinders, and they were totally happy with the vehicles. Now, some, when they got really old, they decided it was time to get rid of them, but hey, you get 250, 300,000 or more out of a vehicle, what's to complain about if you were the original owner? Or in the case of this woman, $3,000? She's still driving it? Hasn't thrown any real money into it? That's a bargain. She brought it here because somebody was trying to rip her off for $800 for a brake job, and I've checked it. The only thing it needs is front pads, which I'm going to change after I make this video. No big deal. They're pretty reliable vehicles. They just were. The new ones? Nah, not so much. No, they don't make these Xterras anymore. They made them from 1999 to 2015. The main reason being that they're pretty much gas hogs. And they're all trying to make vehicles that get better gas mileage. Who knows? Maybe they'll bring it back. They always keep taking things away, bringing things back. You never know what people are going to sell. But they didn't stop making them because they were absolute junkers. The market forces just made them decide, well, we don't want a big gas hog to sell, so we'll stop making them. And like I said, not only can you fit a bunch of stuff inside, but this has got the fancy top on it. You can put a whole bunch of luggage, bicycles, whatever you want on the top, too. So let's get rid of the rod. Take it for a spin. As we go in, like I say, it starts right up. It's a stable driving platform, that's sure. You're up high enough in the air. Doesn't have much body roll. As you can see, when you step on the gas, the wheels are spinning because it's wet. This thing still has get up and go, still shifts smooth. Hey, 200-something thousand miles. This thing was pretty solid built. And being big and heavy, it rides quite well for an SUV. Sure, the gas mileage isn't that great, but it's stable. This thing still has the original shocks, struts on it, still handles decent. For $3,000, hey, not a bad deal, really. Hey, corner's fine. Sure, the windshield's got a big crack in it, but hey, it's not the car's fault. All in all, it's a pretty fun driving experience. As old as it is, it still goes, handles, brakes. Now, when this particular vehicle was new, wasn't a particularly loaded one. It was two-wheel drive, not all-wheel drive. It's about $21,000, which was a decent deal back in the day. Look at it, 200-something thousand miles, still run strong, shift strong, stop strong. They weren't bad cars. Hey, if you could pick one up that looks as good as this, that runs as good as this, 2 years ago for $3,000, now it's got over 200,000 miles, it's still going strong, I call that a deal. Because the only customers of mine that bought these things that weren't happy were people that did horrendous maintenance. They didn't change the oil enough, then the engine started burning up the piston rings because the oil was so low. I had one customer, they'd bring me it once a year, and they'd say, get it inspected, change the oil and service it. Well, I drained the plug and like half a quart of oil would come out. And I told them, watch the oil, change it, it burns some oil, add it in between. Then the next year, the same thing. Here it comes, half a quart of oil left. I tell them the same thing. Well, after 4 years of that, the engine finally was going out and they had to sell it. But if they would have changed the oil regularly and topped it up when it used some, they'd still be driving that thing around. Now, the modern Nissans, not so much. They're not solid built like these things were. And this thing wasn't even made in Japan. It was made in Tennessee. They obviously did a good job. 15 years later, 200,000 something miles, still going down the road, track's good, shift's good, AC still blows cold. They did a good job on this thing. Most of the parts are still original. Got the original air conditioner, alternator, ABS system. It's got a bunch of original parts still on it. The body's still in good shape. People taking care of it. They haven't bashed into things, but you can see, if you cleaned up those wheels, they'd look a lot better. But hey, and the paint's faded on the bumper, but the bumper's still solid. It's got the nice little foothold so you can climb up to the top. This was a well thought out vehicle. And man, you can put a lot of crap on the top here. And I do have to say, I felt safe and secure driving this thing around. Even though it's still got the original shocks and struts on the thing. Back in the day, these things were solid built. Gas hogs, yes, but fast, zippy, tons of space for carrying either people, or if you want to fold the seats down, anything you want, flat screen TVs, wood, whatever. They're very handy vehicles. Now, of course, the 4Runners just started out as a pickup truck. You can still see a little bit left in it. And then they became very popular SUVs. Now, the main problem that I see people having with buying a used 4Runner is people say they want too much money for them. They're just too expensive. But then expense is in the eye of the beholder. This guy bought this thing when it only had 19,000 miles on it in 2002 as a used vehicle. And as we can see as we go inside now, this baby has 386,000 miles on it. And take a listen to the engine as we start it up. Start right up even though it's cold. We'll put it in drive. Doesn't shake at all. Smooth as can be. If you put a blindfold on me, I couldn't tell you if this was a new truck or an old truck. That's how well built these things are. Now, granted, this one was made in Japan, but it certainly was well made in Japan. For people who are wondering what to buy, personally, for all-around vehicle, this setup is the best. As we look under the back, we can see it's classic rear-wheel drive. Big old axle in the back, rear-wheel drive. And check this out. The frame's solid as can be. The only rusty part? Hey, that's the add-on tow hitch. The original stuff is still solid. It's the add-on one that wasn't made as well as the Toyota product that's got rust, but that's just a covering, and it's superficial. That's still real solid metal. It's nothing to worry about. It's just cosmetic. And really, unless you spend your life crawling under your vehicle, do you really care what it looks like under there? As you look under the front, it is not a front-wheel drive vehicle. You can see there's no axle coming in the front. I'll shoot the other side so you can get a better view. There you can see there's no axle in there, although you can see there's a hole there. They can build them. You can add it on if you really wanted to go through a lot of use. But really, most people, they don't really need all-wheel drive. It's a good, stable vehicle with rear-wheel drive, unless you're one of those off-roaders, you live out in a mud hut somewhere with potholes and mud road. These are perfectly fine. The majority of my customers with them never take them off the street, so you're really kind of throwing your money away going all-wheel, four-wheel drive. Unless you live in a big snow belt and you're worried about that, then go right ahead. You'll find that these plain rear-wheel drive ones will cover most situations you're going to get into. And of course, realize less is better. If you're not going to use it, don't buy it. They cost more, you get worse gas mileage. Two-wheel drive ones are perfectly fine. Now, since all the 4Runners are made in Japan, yeah, they're not going to be cheap. Cost money to make good vehicles in Japan. 300-something thousand miles on this. Listen to the engine. Check it out. Now that it's idled down a little, solid engine. Still really quiet. The exhaust sounds perfect. Now you might say, oh, it's smoking. Oh, yeah, it's cold out today. That's condensation. It's gonna smoke when you start it when it's cold outside. People smoke too when it's cold. And some people say, look, water's coming out, something's wrong. No, in this case, absolutely nothing's wrong. When you burn gasoline, which is basically carbon and hydrogen, one of the byproducts is H2O, water vapor. All cars will give a certain amount of water off when you start them out first because they're letting water out, plus they have metal exhaust systems. When they cool down, they have a tendency of absorbing water vapor. When they heat, the water's got to come out somewhere. So that's normal. This thing doesn't lose coolant, doesn't have a blowing head gasket. You're going to see that on any car. And you're going to see the smoke when it's cold outside because it's cold. And the combination of the water vapor inside the exhaust and the hot exhaust, you're going to see smoke. Now, if you want a solid vehicle, these 4Runners are for you. They're still made with solid frames. So they're unlike any other SUV practically out there. They're still on a solid frame. Now the 6-cylinder engine puts out 183 horsepower. It's not a racing machine, but it wasn't designed for that. It's a nice truck frame, very solid, reliable vehicle. 380,000 miles, whatever this thing has, it's a lot of miles to have it still running as good as it's running now. The new ones, of course, have a little bit more horsepower, but they're never meant to be speed demons. Therefore, reliability, and you can still tow stuff. This thing can tow up to 5,000 pounds. It's a basically truck turned into an SUV, and they kept it old style. And me, I like old style reliability, solid frames, never going to come apart. These are vehicles that you could drive forever if you wanted to. If eventually the engine or transmission wears out, you can replace them. They sold so many of them. If you're like me, you go to a junkyard, buy a salvage one, you can get rebuilt ones, you can do whatever you want. But they do have a tendency of lasting so long that you really don't have to do much to them at all in most cases except change the oil. And the only bad thing that ever happened to this was he took it to a Toyota dealer for an oil change and they wrecked the car, but they paid for the damage and fixed it all back up again. And that was years ago. It's still going perfectly fine. And that hilarious story just follows my philosophy entirely. Hey, learn to change your own oil. Do it in your driveway. Make sure it was done right. You got the right oil in it. And you don't have some young kid or real lead-foot mechanic driving it around and smashing it up. And I mean, look at the quality of it. It's old, it's got a ton of miles. The paint and the finish is still in excellent shape. The Japanese care. And sure, if you look here, you can see a little fading, but that's not even the car's fault. Somebody left something square out here in the rain. You could buff it out if you really wanted to. So let's take it for a ride, see how it goes. Away we go. Nice stable handling. Now, this does bounce a little, I'll give you that. It's got the case of the bouncies. But I already knew that because I checked, and the front struts are leaking. They're all leaked out. Hey, you know, 380-something thousand miles. You expect to put struts on eventually. Now you notice you're plenty high enough in the air here. You got lots of clearance. Yet it's still stable. It doesn't feel like it's going to tip over like a cheaper made SUV does, with too much body roll. Now, as I said, it's no race car. Here we'll take off from a stop. I mean, it accelerates. It's nothing rocketing about it, but you hear how smooth that transmission still shifts. It still shifts like a dream with all this mileage. As all that this thing is, I would have no qualms at jumping in it, turning the keys, and driving the thing from Tennessee to California and back. At least after I put struts back on it, new ones. I'd like to have a little bit better handling if I'm driving all the way to California. And when you're just cruising around, hey, it's reasonably quiet. You know, let's face it, it's based on a truck chassis, but it's a reasonably quiet vehicle. Rides quiet, the engine's quiet. It's just a big, heavy, nice riding, full frame SUV. Now, if you don't believe my analysis, let's see what the computer has to say. You can't hide from the computer data. Blah, blah, blah. We'll see what comes up. And we'll start the diagnosis. All right, it does good. The only code it has is the ABS system. Those things often break when the cars are that old. C1224, that there's no signal open or short. Now that code means that the right rear wheel speed sensor isn't giving anything out, so it's probably gone bad. A lot of guys will live without it. When they get this old, the ABS doesn't work all that great anyway, so it just reverts to non-ABS normal braking, and this thing seems pretty fine to me. Driving it around and stopping, I have no problems. It doesn't pull. It stops nice and fast, doesn't have any problems. Now, since that was the only code, let's check live data. That gives you some really good idea what kind of shape the vehicle is in. And here we go. We'll go through the data. Now, for a car with that kind of gas mileage, the long-term fuel trim is only 0.82%. Some of them I'll see 15 or 20. That's hardly anything. It's subtracting just a tiny bit of fuel. And the short-term fuel trim, it's adding 2.3. That's kind of remarkable considering how old this vehicle is. I mean, look at the fuel trim. 99.15%, almost 100%. Pretty good for something with 380,000 miles on it. And if you remember from my other videos, if any of this data is orange, there's a problem. I don't see any orange yet. We look at the misfire counts. 0 across the board, 1 through 6. I don't feel any, and the computer just says yes. And here we go again. Total fuel trim, 1.02. That's out of 1. So it's almost perfect. I gotta say, this whole 4Runner is in better shape than I am. Sure, I'm 67. I'm older than it is, but it does have 386,000 miles on it. I don't know how many miles I have on me, though. The odometer broke a long time ago. So now you know the truth about Toyota 4Runners and why, even though this is a 2001 with 386,000 miles, it's still an excellent vehicle. I'm going to talk about the indestructibility of the old Camrys. In this case, it's a 93 Camry with a 4-cylinder engine and an automatic transmission. Now it may look a little beat up as we walk around it. And when we look inside, it looks like goats have been chewing on the armrest in the middle. And yeah, the paint's faded. It's got a different door on the gas cap. And here on the taillight, it even says crack. And someone smashed into the trunk. And the electric window doesn't work anymore. And you can see the hood on the driver's side, even though it's closed. Has a big gap from being hit. Where the other side is still relatively normal. But it still runs like a clock. Got 318,000 miles on it. But the air conditioning? It still blows cold as ice. And even though it's only got a 4-cylinder engine and an automatic transmission, look at this. It still takes off like a rocket ship. It's got plenty of acceleration. And sure, it bounces quite a bit when you hit bumps. Well, hey, the shocks and struts are all worn out on it, but it still goes down the highway. Let's take a look under the hood. Now this was a luxury model, so it's got the pneumatic struts to hold the hood up instead of having that little rod on it. And amazingly enough, they still work and hold the hood up. Now you can see my customer's modified it. He's got these giant wires because he put a fancy stereo system on it. But the old Toyota alternator is still good enough to run all that power. Back in '93 when they were making these things, they over-engineered them. So they lasted. And lasted. Kept oil in its 2200cc 4-cylinder engine. They could run forever. This 93's got the original engine, the original transmission, the original air conditioner. I mean, they built those things to last. And sure, maybe they didn't paint them that good in those days. Saw the hood, but hey, it's still running and it's not rusting. It's just corroding. And check this out. Look at the headlamps. 1993. They made them better in those days. Now, when these first came out, I had customers that bought them, and they said, we road tested one, and we thought, oh, it's got a V6 or V8 engine in it. And they open the hood and see it's only a 4-cylinder engine. That is one well-designed 4-cylinder engine. Now, they didn't sell many of these in the United States with the 5-speed standard transmissions, but years ago I had a customer special order one, and that thing could burn rubber in all 5 gears. It was an extremely fast car, but it made him mad because back in the day, if you got the standard 5-speed transmission, you couldn't get it with power windows, so he had to buy it with hand crank windows. And he was mad because he wanted power windows, but back then they didn't make them. Now, they were a well thought out car too. A cavernous trunk that goes on, and back seats. In a Japanese car back then, they had a lot of room. You didn't feel like you were squeezed into a sardine can. Now, sure, this car's seen better cosmetic days, but it still runs like a clock. Heck, I got my youngest son one of these ages ago used. He ran it into walls. He even flattened all the tires one time. But the thing just kept going. Had a lot of dings and ripples in them, and I got a lot of parts from junkyards like hoods and things when he kept breaking them. Now, when we go under the car, you can see it's still got some of its plastic pieces. You can take them and throw them away. But the main thing about these are there's big solid metal right here. So even if you went over a speed bump, rather than hitting the bottom of the engine, it would just scrape this part of the frame, which is a great design on these cars. It certainly saved it when my son was driving his. The bottom of that thing, man, it was all scraped, but it hadn't touched the engine or transmission. And a big advantage, even if you own one today, is so many of the parts on them are interchangeable. You can get aftermarket door handles real easy. This has 2 different ones. Now, I had plastic radiators even back then. I had a guy bring one the other day. It took me like 5 minutes on the internet till I found one 3 blocks down the street at an AutoZone. And it cost me less than $100. A whole brand new radiator. They're still cheap to drive and repair. And being that old, the insurance on these things is dirt cheap because, after all, they're just a 4-cylinder engine. I drove one from here to Big Bend where the speed limit's 85 and I went 90. Once I got outside San Antonio and the speed limit went up to 85 the whole way. No problem at all cruising down there and back. Other than having indigestion from eating at a really bad Mexican restaurant near the border. These old Camrys were pretty much indestructible monsters with just a tiny bit of maintenance. And if you want to get the ultimate rat car, hey, an old Camry could be the car for you. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.